I got some more books that I wanted to go over. This one's it's mainly like, well, I guess the books are all politics, American politics and stuff, and religion, right? This one's called Disestablishment and Religious Dissent, Church-State Relations in the New American States, 1776 through 1833. It's edited by Carl Esbeck and Jonathan Hartog. It's like different contributors, and they're all going over like different reasons for disestablishment. Like here in the introduction, it says, this is what it looks like that. Sorry if you can. Yeah. This is what we asked of our chapter authors. The chapter authors were instructed to look for the cultural, political, biblical, and economic concerns bearing on their state's disestablishment. Why was disestablishment achieved in their state, and by what process was it accomplished? What people groups or immigrants populated the state, and how did that matter? How did the ideas of disestablishment play out, quote, on the ground, end quote? Did the practice of people's religion tell us how disestablishment was actually understood and new laws actually applied? What happened to those factions who unsuccessfully defended the establishment? Was there any consideration about how disestablishment would affect education? Relief to the poor and widows, laws on public decorum, morals, blasphemy, or Sunday closing to retail commerce. Disestablishment was not just about changes in written law, yet the written law did change, and those laws were unfadingly preserved. Unlike other primary materials, such laws provide, in brief and concrete form, what the leaders, or at least the majority thereof, were thinking about church-state relations in their state. The editors found that what was most lacking in previous studies was the uncovering and organizing of primary materials, newspaper pamphlets, sermons, private journals and letters, and judicial proceedings that give evidence and color to the process of disestablishment in each state. We urge contributors to avoid conclusory statements. We request that, to the extent possible, their declarative sentences be backed by reference to primary materials where such materials were not preserved. That also was to be noted. We hope that readers who are unable to devote their time to unearthing primary materials will rely on each chapter's reported evidence and then draw their own conclusions concerning what transpired in each state leading to this establishment. The editors firmly instructed authors not to express their thoughts, if any, on history's application to issues that concern church-state relations in the 20th and 21st centuries. The reconsideration and repeal of state establishmentarian laws were almost always intertwined with the sponsorship of laws that bear on the protection of individual religious belief, often termed the right of private judgment. For example, a law barring clergy from holding public office imposed a crucial choice implicating a cleric's personal religious liberty, but it also tells us something about how church-state relations were conceptualized. There is no neat way of differentiating between these two types of laws. Those securing religious liberty of the individual and those deregulating the preferred institutional church. So the chapters of each state discuss developments in individual religious liberty as well, but with an eye to what those developments might tell us about the movement towards the church disestablishment. It says, Um, Although the path to disestablishment in each colony cum state had features that were distinct to each state in both timing and substance, obviously there were some commonalities. For the guidance of our authors, we provide a list of 5 recurring legal features that constituted the British-like establishment and thus likely targets of the push to disestablish. It was also a matter of interest if some of these features did not occur in a given state. A commonality of all establishmentarian laws is they linked the state church or preferred religion to the regulating state. The list was not intended to be exhaustive of course, or our authors were to report whatever they found. 1. Government financial support of the state church, assessments to pay ministers, and rent from glebe lands. 2. Government control over the creeds, order of worship, polity, and clerical appointments of the state church. Licensure of state-tolerated dissenting termed nonconformist clerics, licenses tethered to a single meeting house, thereby preventing an itinerant preaching by nonconformists. 3. Mandatory attendance at church services in the state church, prohibitions on church services by others, and required licensure to open a meeting house for nonconformists. 4. Use of the state church to record births, marriages, and deaths, to perform all marriages and funerals, and to administer tax revenues for care of the poor and widow. Today we regard these tasks as civil functions, but in the British-like establishments of the 18th century, these matters were within the jurisdiction of the church. 5. Religious tasks, public office, and voting rights confined to members of the state church, or a broader religious task to include nonconformist religious preferences for securing military commission, government contracts, as well as admission to university and faculty appointments. While not part of the foregoing working definition of an establishment, there were 3 additional things for which our authors were to be on alert. 1. Although the editors regard the adoption of religious exemptions from public duties borne by others as a means of accommodating the religious exercise of dissenters or other minorities, as opposed to steps towards disestablishment, the chapter authors were told to look for religious exceptions from general laws, such as excusals from oath-taking, hat removal in court, jury service, and military draft. 2. Following disestablishment, some states imposed new disabilities on religious societies. This legislation was not part of the disestablishment process, but a new phase. Examples are restrictions on the church polity permitted in order to incorporate a church under a state law, with a bias towards lay governance, and as well as statutory acquiring assets over a given value. If these features appeared in a given state, authors were to report them and urged to uncover their purpose. 3. Following the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia, the several states were engaged in the ratification debate from September 1787 through all of 1788. Additionally, following the First Federal Congress in New York City and its reporting out a Bill of Rights, state legislatures were engaged in the debate over ratification of these proposed amendments during the period October 1789 through all of 1790. Chapter authors were asked to report if either of these state-level contests had any bearing on their state disestablishment. This is findings in the face of conventional wisdom. So the book's chapters make significant scholarly contributions by recounting in detail the process of disestablishment in each of the former colonies, as well as religious legal place in the states of the new Federal Republic. Although we emphasize that each state disestablishment was unique, now that the editors had full accounting from our chapter authors, we are able to draw some commonality of principles at work across the states. In that spirit, we offer corrections to the past telling of the story. The conventional wisdom in America is that disestablishment was a bold national experiment in religious freedom, or when embodied in the First Amendment. While it is understood that the First Amendment, indeed the entire Bill of Rights, bound only the new federal government, the popular claim is that the two religion clauses of the First Amendment soon set the model that eventually swept all of the states. The conventional telling as well is that Americans wanted religious freedom for their own sect, but selfishly not for others. Yet pragmatism won out. All sects were a minority, it was observed, and thus people reluctantly came to an understanding that religious freedom had to be conceded to others if they wanted it for themselves. And in this narrative, religious freedom is achieved not out of principle but out of practicality. These two claims are repeated as axioms in grade school, social studies classrooms, right on through textbooks for university undergraduates. The historical record is far more nuanced and complex. More importantly, the conventional axioms are false. In the face of this standard narrative, and based on the 20 chapters that follow, we report the following findings. Some findings are in the negative, that is, the nature of a given finding is what did not contribute, as opposed to what did contribute to disestablishment in America's states. However, in a topic written on as much as church and state in the United States, the correcting of widely held misconceptions is just as salient as the identification of wholly new historical patterns and causes. And here it goes over like some findings. Finding number 1, neither the U.S. Constitution 1787 through 88, nor the First Amendment of 1789 through 91 contributed to the disestablishment process in the original 13th state. The same is true in the 3 admitted states that were never federal territories, Vermont, Kentucky, and Maine. We see this in multiple ways. It says, 1. No state modeled its constitution after the First Amendment, or even considered the amendment when making state religion law. 2. Article 6, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution prohibits a religious test for federal office. The new states did not follow the federal lead. Indeed, most every state had a religious test clause until well into the 19th century. 3. The oaths of office set forth in the U.S. Constitution permit an officer to either swear or affirm. See, for example, the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, the latter being an option to accommodate Quakers and Anabaptists. Again, we found no evidence that the federal example influenced the law of any state. Some states did permit affirmations in lieu of oaths, but in doing so, they were not influenced by the federal model. 4. No state's disestablishment was influenced by the state-level debate over ratification of the U.S. Constitution, or 2 years later, the state-level debate over the Federal Bill of Rights. It says the First Amendment did apply in U.S. territories, of course, and so it could have had a bearing on shaping the religion law in lands that were for a while federal territories, such as Tennessee, Ohio, Louisiana, Missouri, and Florida, but it never happened. Our chapter authors found no reports of violations of the religious freedoms, protections in the First Amendment during the years when these states were federal territories. Moreover, there is no record of the First Amendment being raised when these later admitted states were being concerned by the U.S. Congress for admission to the Union. It was not until 1845 that the religious clauses of the First Amendment received even passing mention by the U.S. Supreme Court, and only then it was to acknowledge the truism that the First Amendment did not bind the states. Indeed, from the outset of the First Amendment, it had little impact even on religious freedom within the federal government. For example, there were 9 U.S. Supreme Court cases involving church or religion issues before the 1845 High Court confirmed that the before the 1845 High Court confirmed that the First Amendment bound only federal law. None of these cases sought to apply the First Amendment to the issues in the case. There were 10 more such cases before the first application by a member of the court that assumed the establishment and free exercise clauses had something to say about federal law on matters of religion, finding to protecting the right of private judgment and individual religious observance and practice came easily to the new American states. However, voluntarism and the second finding, voluntarism in the founding of ministers and churches, leading to the repeal of religious tax assessments and glebs, was slow and arduous work spanning 50 years. The spirit of revolutionary liberty extended to liberty and individual religious belief or the right of private judgment. Indeed, in a few states, New Jersey, Delaware, and Rhode Island, this personal religious liberty was a fact on the ground, even before the American Revolution. When it came to financial support for the state church, however, disestablishment forces struggled against the axioms of the old world, that a state secures unity by providing financial support for a religion that inculcates it in its people the needed civic virtues. The advocates of financial voluntarism, that the churches are better off if they are alone supported by their followers, thus had a harder time with succeeding. Yet the dissenters persevered, and the growing numbers drawn to their denominations served as vindication. They were convinced that past church dependence on state aid had led to religion's corruption, where matters of religious doctrine and observance were bent to serve reasons of the state. They believed religion's purity would follow a deregulated environment, where each sect was entitled to wax or wane according to the zeal of its adherents and the appealing of its teachings. That said, an extension of the larger principle that underlay voluntarism in funding that establishments corrupted religion and divided republics would take decades to be worked out when it came to what this meant for public schooling, as well as what it meant for a state's use of familiar Protestant symbols and a state's partaking in Protestant practices that had almost unthinkingly become part of the public civil religion. Then it's the third finding, says, finding number 3, it says, not only did each of the original and early admitted states have its own unique disestablishment, but it cannot be said that the disestablishment story in any one state was more important than that of others. This means that we can find no warrant for the U.S. Supreme Court's step in Everson versus Board of Education of Ewing Township. It's in 1947, right? I think so. And it says, and subsequent cases that elevated the disestablishment in Virginia as the more impactful in schooling early Americans and disestablishment principles. Much the same is true for Reynolds versus United States, which was 1879, where the Supreme Court looked to disestablishment events in Virginia to construe the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. And says, further, the more closely Virginia is studied, the more it appears that the Old Dominion was in certain respects an oddity among state disestablishments. For example, only Virginia totally prohibited churches from incorporating under state law, whereas all similarly situated voluntary organizations were permitted to enjoy the benefits and convenience of operating as a corporation. And of all the states, only Virginia compelled the formally established church to return to the government glebs and personal property vested while the church had been established. Finding 4. It says, a majority of the colonists who agitated for disestablishment were religious dissenters who, although in agreement concerning the general tenets of Protestant Christianity, still materially differed from the established Protestant church in their state. Their beliefs motivated them to seek freedom for reasons that are rooted in Christianity, as they understood the teachings of that faith. Christ's kingdom is not of this world, and rendering unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's were biblical passages strongly suggestive to these dissenters. The The state church property occupied different centers of authority under God. Also like the passage in the Bible, right, about Caesar and kingdom of God. Yeah, this is said when the church was separate, right, from the empire. When it was, yeah, you could say it was in its dissenting form when it was separate from the empire. So it would be consistent with dissenting Christians in America in that regard, I guess. And this is, they believed that religious freedom was a matter of individual religious conscience, termed a right of private judgment, and that the church, for reasons having to do with her role as understood biblically, was a body to be kept institutionally distinct from civil government and financial support, and financially supported entirely by church members, tithes and offerings, termed financial voluntarism. That churches remain voluntaristic and is essential to their health. It was believed for too close an embrace by the state would only detract from and even corrupt the church. Says these religious dissenters operated in an arena of increasing Protestant pluralism, while some states maintain a great deal of religious homogeneity. This began to break down into Protestant denominationalism through the 18th and into the early 19th centuries. Some colonies, especially New Jersey, Delaware, and Rhode Island, were pluralist from their founding, whether by choice or accident. The Great Awakening of the 1740s was the first harbinger of emerging pluralism, as it increased the ranks of independent congregations in New England and introduced Baptists into the Mid-Atlantic and South. Migration from the British Isles and from colony to colony in the 18th century further increased the growth and splintering of religious denominations. It says this reality would receive a new jolt in the early 19th century with another round of revivals known as the Great Awakening. And it says energized a movement, energized Methodists and Baptists, somewhat less so with Presbyterians. Along with other formerly dissenting groups, the Second Great Awakening increased the ranks of fervent Christians that had no links to establishmentarian denominations. Many of these enthusiastic Christians explicitly preached individual liberty, political and otherwise, the institutional separation of church and state, voluntary associations as a primary means of social organizing, and republicanism and local governance as the best form of civil government. These origins worked to depress claims that this establishment was forged out of government indifference to religion or even hostility to it. They also worked to suppress the idea that this establishment meant that religion was to have no role in shaping public affairs. Church and state would be separate, but religion and politics could not. Indeed, a majority believed religion, as they experienced it, was instrumental to the formation of virtue, and virtue was instrumental to the self-discipline of citizens thought necessary to sustain a republic. There's like several other findings, like that's finding number 5. Because establishments were complex and varied phenomena, so was the process of disestablishment. This establishment was a 50-year project. Finding number 6 says neither resistance to the congregational Puritan establishment in New England, nor the Church of England establishment in the southern colonies was a material cause of the war. So neither of these was a material cause of the War of Independence against Great Britain. This is in contrast to the French Revolution, which was intensely anti-clerical, and in significant part a revolt against the French Catholic Church for its ecclesiastical support of the oppressive French monarchy. Let me see. He has other ones. Yeah, it's got like several more. Because I just briefly mentioned them, right? Because I was reading for quite a bit. Like finding 7, the contribution of anti-Catholic to the process of disestablishment is overstated. Another finding this book has is Number 8. States impose regulatory disabilities on religious societies out of a populist desire to safeguard religious individuals from ecclesiastical authorities. This new phase of legislation was not part of this. It was not part of the Disestablishment Project, which was a repealing of a long-standing laws defining, regulating, and supporting the state church. Rather, having created a free market in religion, the aim was a safeguard the conscience of the individual religious consumer from overreach by church leaders. And it says, finding number 9. Religious tests initially were narrow preferences in aid of the state church and thus encouraged conformity to it. In the first reforms, the religious tests were broadened to embrace most or all Protestants and later all Christians. As things evolved still further, religious test laws were repealed, or their underlying purpose moved away from establishmentarianism. This is finding number 10. The conventional view of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's broad influence on the disestablishment process in the States has little support in the evidence reported by our chapter authors. It goes over the state of Virginia, Bill of Establishment of Religious Freedoms, right? It goes over that, and then says, finally, we offer two notes on presentation. As to organization, the state-by-state chapters that follow are arranged by date of each state's disestablishment. The date on which disestablishment occurred in a given state is often a matter of dispute, depending on how establishment is defined. In that event, the chapters are ordered according to the date that a given state repealed its ministerial assessment or religious tax, the state embracing financial voluntarism. The danger of disarrangement is that the more heated state contests came later and the easy cases come first. But then we anticipate many readers will skip around in the book rather than reading the chapters in sequence. Concerning style, when quoting historical documents, including state constitutions, we instructed our authors to retain the original spelling, however unconventional in the eye of the modern reader. So that's this book. It came out. It came out this year, right? Yeah, I think it came out this year. Yeah, 2026. Copyright 2019. Yeah, it was a paperback printing 2026. Yeah, so I got this one recently. It's very interesting. I wanted to because it has all these different contributors, right? And they go over each state's disestablishment, like why they disestablished, and it's not as simple as people think. This one's also a recent one that came out by Matthew Avery Sutton, called "Chosen Land: How Christianity Made America and Americans Remade Christianity." It's like this very interesting book. It's a very thick book. It goes over things like disestablishment, and it argues against the secular, ideology. It mentions something about free market capitalism or something. Work here in the introduction, just kind of give you an idea of what's it about or so. On this page it says, the government preached by a humble carpenter from Nazareth, the gospel preached by a humble carpenter from Nazareth 2 millennia ago, has left an indelible mark on nearly every aspect of American life. It inhabits the lives of its peoples, haunts their dreams, and inspires their actions. It has motivated Christians to seek influence everywhere, from politics to culture, to business to foreign policy. Chosen Land is the first book to chronicle Christians' epic 500-year mission to turn North America into a holy land. a prelude to God's millennial kingdom. This mission is all the more remarkable since the nation's founders wrote a deliberately godless constitution and never meant to establish an explicitly Christian nation. Even though that's pretty much debatable, right? Because he thinks it's godless or whatever. But it says, yet Christianity, this book argues, became the dominant engine of American political and cultural life, shaping law, policy, and popular entertainment, and ideals of gender, race, and nationhood. To ignore its power is to misunderstand American history and America itself. So the book presents like an argument. And it says here, this argument is significant in at least three ways. First, it challenges the traditional narrative of the United States as a secular republic by emphasizing how the country developed one of the most Christian cultures in the modern world. Ironically, through the very mechanisms that were supposed to ensure religious neutrality, it demonstrates that separation of church and state was not a barrier to religious influence, but stimulated religious innovation, expansion, and integration into every part of American life. Second, the book redefines how American culture was forged. It emphasizes the central role of grassroots religious actors, preachers, entrepreneurs, and movements leaders who thrived in the free market religious environment created by the First Amendment. These figures operated both inside and outside the halls of power, constantly reinventing Christianity to meet changing political, social, and economic realities. In doing so, Christians took an ancient religion and reconstructed it over and over again, tuning it to their times and places and to the demands of the public, even as they claimed to be doing nothing more than upholding the traditional faith. They fashioned a version of Christianity that was thoroughly American and made America, in turn, profoundly Christian. Finally, Chosen Land places Christianity at the center of American national identity. It links Christianity to key facets of national development, suggesting that to understand American distinctiveness fully, we must account for how Christianity shaped and was shaped by every major historical development, from education to war. Americans' success at weaving Christianity into all aspects of their culture is what made the United States so unique. Understanding this makes Chosen Land essential for understanding the ideological foundations of both domestic and international policy. Religion, however, never functions alone. Recent books have placed race and racism at the core of U.S. history. Other indigenous peoples and others still technology and economic class. My book draws on this excellent work while I focus my story on the centrality of Christian activism to the American story. This perhaps more than anything else is what distinguishes the United States from its peer nations. The work of Christian activists affected and affects the lives of all Americans, which makes understanding this history essential. Unlike in many European and Latin American countries, where the state finances churches and mandates religious training in public schools, in the United States the government does not keep houses of worship in business, and with no state funding for religion, we might expect the United States to have a more secular identity than nations with established churches, and American Christians to have less power and influence. Some founders, such as Thomas Jefferson, wanted it this way, but the reality is just the opposite. The religion clauses of the First Amendment empowered religious activities as they sought to erect the kingdom of God in the United States. The clauses read, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, end quote. The, quote, disestablishment, end quote, clause guaranteed that no single denomination would secure a monopoly on state funding, but rather than hindering Christian faith in the United States, it propelled competition and forced religious leaders to make religion broadly attractive to study and meet the needs of the people. And it talks about disestablishment had not, however, create an even playing field on which all religions competed equally. The men who drafted the Constitution and the nation's laws essentially rigged the game. Most sought to ensure that mainstream Protestants would maintain the upper hand in the United States. Although the founders refused to establish a single national denomination, they limited opportunities and constrained choices. They wanted religious leaders who upheld traditional hierarchies, deferred to political authorities, and championed market capitalism. While separation blocked the creation of an official state church, it simultaneously facilitated the rise of a decentralized, evolving, dominant Protestant power structure and independent, unofficial quasi-establishments. The Protestant leaders directing the unofficial establishment often collaborated with ruling authorities. They worked with policy makers to shape Americans' view of topics ranging from clothing styles to birth control to same-sex relationships to popular culture. They crafted laws regulating abortion, blasphemy, commerce, cussing, dancing, gambling, marriage, media, the Sabbath, sodomy, and also every other part of American life. It taught wide swaths of the American public how to understand race relations, mass media, pop culture, gender, sex, sexuality, economics, politics, and domestic policy. Nothing fell outside their sphere of influence, and so Protestant leaders persuaded politicians and courts to interpret the second clause of the First Amendment, the first exercise clause, in ways that usually benefited them. They encouraged a broad range of Christians to practice their faith unhampered, but they established outer limits. Protestants delineated the, quote, orthodox, and, quote, faith. They decided which groups might ostensibly strengthen the nation and which ones should be ostracized as cults. They sought to eliminate competition from alternative religions at home and abroad. Some Christian groups faced substantial persecution, sometimes from mobs and sometimes from government officials. Meanwhile, those outside of Christianity have fewer rights and liberties than what the Constitution seemed to promise. The founders created a world in which Christian activists could impose their versions of the faith on the rest of the nation. Yet the power of Christian leaders to always depend on popular support, which church served. Severed from the state, ministers could not rely on institutional backing. They had no pope or bishop or king to legitimate them. They needed the people. If they lost their appeal, others stepped in to take their place. This democratization forced religious leaders to craft messages that resonated broadly, making faith relevant and accessible and responsive to lay concerns. In this competitive free market religious landscape, pastors and activists became entrepreneurs of faith. They vied for followers, not only against each other but also against secular alternatives. Success demanded innovation, charisma, and the savvy use of emerging technologies. Those who excelled gained national influence, recasting Christianity. Their popularity allowed them to claim a mandate to speak for American Christianity as a whole, contributing to the nation's sense of religious and cultural exceptionalism. They produced one of the most dynamic, creative, enduring, and powerful Christian cultures in the world, and inspired a faith that can be oppressive, racist, sexist, exclusionary, and homophobic. They spun Christianity into the United States' most popular and enduring product, something packaged, advertised, and sold to Americans and exported to people around the world. The Christian faith has permeated almost every aspect of American life, yet it is so common and pervasive in the United States. We often don't notice its effects. It has compelled action and validated choices. It has stimulated righteousness and provided cover for evil. It has provided common language that gives meaning to the momentous and the mundane. It has defined individuals' relationships and conditions. Their analysis of politics colored their views of the of the economy, informed their voting priorities and patterns, determined their perspectives on social issues, influenced the curriculum they wanted their children to study, and help structure how they understand natural disasters, geopolitical changes, and war. It has influenced Americans' priorities, and both pedestrian and profound. It has filled in blanks, rationalized choices, and connected dots. Christianity has provided Americans with frameworks through which to interpret their lives, their communities, and the future. Whether Christian or not, Americans live their lives in cultural and political paradigms defined by Christian ideas. So the book focuses on intersection between religion and culture, rather than attempt to provide an exhaustive account of every notable Christian movement and activist in American history. In this book, he says he highlights groups, individuals who substantially influenced the trajectory of the nation. and have guided everything from colonization to the war to civil rights, because it emphasizes social, political, and cultural power. It's a predominantly white Protestant story, but it also a story of non-white religious activities who challenge white supremacy and all this other stuff. So it sounds kind of like, lefty, but overall, like, I do like that it takes into the account how powerful the idea of the Christian nation is, right? And I like all the themes that it goes over, and so I'll stop there. And then, yeah, this is the book. Federalist Papers annotated. These are the Federalist Papers. This has an original commentary by Professor William Wagner and with Nicole Wagner, right? It's like this. It's a nice hard copy. How to get it from the site, because they you have to make a donation. They'll give you a physical copy, right? It's from Salt and Light Global Publishing. It has all the Federalists, and also have like a, let's see, above it has like the commentary and stuff. Like that, right? It's like this. That's the commentary up here, and then the Federalist down here. This one is Race and Covenant, Recovering the Religious Roots for American Reconciliation. It's edited by Gerald R. McDermott. It looks like this. It just goes over the issues of like questions of slavery and social justice, and yeah. This anthology, right, because it got different contributors. This anthology explores the theme of national covenant in scripture, history, and contemporary American society, as well as the theology and practices of covenant communities. Its author suggests new strategies for finding racial reconciliation in this troubled time. This one, I don't know if I show this one off. It's History of Religious Liberty by Michael Ferris from Tyndale to Madison. It goes over one of Tyndale's influences all the way to like the Reformers and the Americas. It's from Ben Wright. It's called Bonds of Salvation: How Christianity Inspired and Limited American Abolitionism. Looks like this. Nice cover and all that. It goes over slavery and the Christian reasons for abolition or emancipation and stuff. And this one's a new one that came out. Yeah, this one came out recently. This one's called Protestants and Patriots, Presbyterians in the Age of Revolution by D.G. Hart. Looks like this. Nice hardcover. It says historians have often described Presbyterianism as a political orientation that leads to a rebellion and revolution. D.G. Hart interrogates this assumption, instead presenting a complex narrative of Presbyterian understanding of political authority and the role of the church in society, synthesizing Presbyterian developments in England and Scotland, Ireland, the United States, and Canada from 1560 to 1870. Hart compellingly explains first why Presbyterianism was politically disruptive in Britain for 150 years, and then how these Protestants adjusted to liberal democracy. The truly revolutionary side of Presbyterianism took place during the religious and parliamentary wars of Scotland and England during the 1630 and 1640s. Almost 150 years before the American Revolution, after 1640, Presbyterians remained politically assertive, but switched from state churches and covenanted monarchs to civil and religious liberties and republican government. Even so, fallout from the Age of Revolution extended to Presbyterian involvement in the American founding and the formation of the Dominion of Canada. Ultimately, as a rigorous faith that refused political compromise, Presbyterianism unintentionally laid the groundwork for religious disestablishment and religious freedom, and in so doing, Presbyterians became unlikely defenders of liberal democracy. This one, I think he's Jewish. This is Reclaiming the Covenant, America's Remarkable 250 Years and Assuring it Continues, by Eldad Zizoni. Yeah, I mispronounce it. Sorry, like this. Nice little short book. Let's see. Got like 9 chapters, and I just see. Let's read the back, I guess. It says America's 250th anniversary is no time for a victory lap. It is a moment to ask whether we still understand what made the nation extraordinary, and whether we can keep it. Timely, profound, and elegantly written, Reclaiming the Covenant is both diagnosis and prescription, an urgent call to understand our founding architecture before we lose it. That contribute as some endorsements. This one says, is from Daniel Pipes, is the president of Middle East Forum. He says, the pseudonyms author of this remarkable book pays tribute to the United States semi-quincentennial by understanding 3 tasks: identifying the country's successful founding design, locating current threats to that design, and recommending methods to sustain it. Focused on what he calls the American Covenant, Eldad Designly argues that based on the Hebrew antecedent, this defined membership in an unprecedented and inspiring way, not via a person's identity, but via full acceptance of a citizen's shared obligation. The stock of specific examples then brings this abstraction convincingly and powerfully to life. The other endorsement is from Andrew Pisson, founding director of the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism. He says, a bold, intellectually rich meditation on what makes the American experiment both unique and worth preserving. With impressive range, Designly weaves political philosophy, constitutional history, and Jewish intellectual tradition into a penetrating account of America as a covenantal nation, one grounded not in identity but in shared commitment, provocative, erudite, and timely. It's an interesting book, so I like the covenantal themes. This one's called Faith in Markets, Christian Capitalism and the Early American Republic by Joseph Slaughter. It looks like this. Sorry. This is in Faith in Markets. Joseph P. Slaughter offers a new account of the interplay between religion and capitalism in early American history, following 19th century Protestant entrepreneurs and their visions of a Christian marketplace. Slaughter explores how they infuse faith into their businesses, and in turn, how these distinctly religious businesses shaped American capitalism. This one is The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism by Max Weber. Looks like this one, an old book. This one is it's from Greg Muldrew, The Capitalist Self. The Social Origins of Financial Capitalism in Early Modern England. This. And she says this book explores the multiple economic, institutional, moral, and social components that enabled capitalism to penetrate down to the village elite and to produce profound social upheavals through rich analysis carried out close to the various actors. This book fundamentally renews our knowledge of the birth and development of capitalism in Britain. It's an endorsement by Lawrence Fontaine, the author of The Moral Economy, Poverty, Credit, and the Trust in Early Modern Europe. Which I thought looked interesting, right? So I got some books on capitalism to understand, like, what is it, right? And I found like 3 volumes of this one. From Deirdre Nansen Miklowski. This one's a Bourgeois Equality, How Ideas, Not Capital or Institutions Enrich the World, right? Looks like this. It's a pretty thick kind of book. It's like, this is the That was volume that was. There's like 3 of them. This is the other one from the same author. This one's called The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce. It's like that. And this one is the third one, I think. Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World. Same author. This is the big economic story of our times. Is not the Great Recession. It is how China in 1978 and India in 1991 began to assign dignity and liberty to the bourgeois. Denied for so long. The result was an explosion in economic growth, showing that economic change depends less on foreign trade, investment, imperialism, exchange rates, or other material causes, and much more on what people believe, or so says the Deirdre and McCloskey and Bourgeois Dignity, a fiercely contrarian history that develops a similar argument about economics in the West, an utterly fascinating sequel to her critically acclaimed book, The Bourgeois Virtues, The Bourgeois Dignity, as a feast of intellectual riches from one of our most spirited and ambitious historians and economists. Okay, well, these are all the books that I got, right, for today. So if you like any of them, obviously feel free to check them out. And yeah, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe. Thank you. God bless.